It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me. Craig, shut up.
Hey, I need you guys to do these things.
I'm Craig Price, professional bastard. Nice to meet you. It's Reality Check with Craig Price. This week, meteorologist Steve LaNore talks the weather. I'm your host, Craig Price, and it's no secret that I have got a beef with TV weathermen. I've written about it. I talk about it in my presentation. I think that weathermen scare people on purpose to get people to watch. They don't call it Weather Center. They call it Severe Weather Center. They don't call it Sunshine Central. It's Storm Central. They love storms, disasters, making up words like snow-ocalypse or snowmageddon. If you watch the Weather Channel, what do you see? It's all what I call weather porn, but it's all disaster weather porn. Floods, tsunamis, blizzards, lightning. They love that stuff. But thankfully, Steve is here. He's a much more down-to-earth, direct forecaster, and he just loves science and weather. His new book, Weather Wits and Science Snickers, is for kids and engages them in fun and funny ways. And the weather is really important to us. You don't need to know what the scores are. Lots of people could care less about sports. There's a lot of people who don't care about politics or world events, but every person on Earth is affected by weather. When you meet a new person, awkward conversations are always started with, this weather, eesh. Or it's, this weather, hey, pretty nice, huh? It's a huge part of our lives, but it still can be kind of mysterious to us. Thankfully, here with the big science-based brain to talk meteorology is Steve LaNore. I did put questions out. I knew that the weatherman was coming on, so I put and actually you're not a weatherman. There's a difference between a weatherman and a meteorologist. A meteorologist actually has a degree of some sort, I'm assuming?
That's right, Craig. Basically, a meteorologist is an atmospheric scientist. You have a 4-year college degree, and you study everything from physics to basic science to how radar works, and, of course, lots of classes in how the atmosphere is put together. And I'll spare you all the technical mumbo-jumbo, but there's a lot more to it than just looking at a model on the Internet, which anybody can do that now. It doesn't make them a meteorologist. Right,
because I was going to say a meteorologist actually has the expertise and the experience behind them, where a weatherman or a weather person is just reading a forecast that they have gotten off a teleprompter.
Well, yes and no. I do want to say that people that have been doing it for a long time, even if they're not meteorologists, will pick up a lot along the way. I like to use the analogy of a nurse is not a doctor, but if she's been working or he's been working in the hospital 30 years, they're still not a doctor, but they've learned a lot more about the profession of medicine they did when they were first out of school. But I don't think that replaces the training that you would have as a real degreed meteorologist. But I think that a person that's a weathercaster can become more credible with time. So I don't want to just diss people that aren't meteorologists and say they know nothing, because that's not really fair.
No, I understand that, but David Letterman was a weatherman.
And you're scaring me with that.
Steve,
I know he was a weatherman, and he'd be a good example of someone that didn't know much. But
right,
he's on the low end of what I would consider knowledgeable about weather.
I believe Steve Ducey from Fox News was a weatherman. He might still do the weather for them. I don't watch him anymore, but he was a weatherman. So my point is that a meteorologist it kicks it up a notch in expertise and knowledge. I didn't want to.
Pat Sajak was a weatherman too in Nashville, by the way.
See, so I think a lot of people don't understand the difference. I think they just think, they say meteorologist to make it sound more credible when it actually has a education behind it versus, hey, we grabbed Dave off the intern to have him say the things off the teleprompter.
Absolutely.
Now, I put out there on the web to get questions because, I wanted to, if they had any interesting comments, and I noticed a pattern form. One pattern that I have also brought up, it's in my book. It's that I have an issue with weathermen. Is that a lot of people don't understand how you can do a 10-day forecast but not figure out what's going to happen tomorrow. So if you can kind of tell us, how do you get your information, and then how do you apply your expertise when you give your particular forecast? Because you would assume, since it's science, that weatherman A on channel whatever would have the same information as the weatherman on another channel.
Well, again, Craig, I kind of like to use the analogy of a doctor. If you were to go to two different doctors with the same problem, they might not get the exact same answer for you. And we all have the same information if you're doing your homework. We all have the same model data. We all have the same temperatures, the same satellite imagery, but we all interpret that a little differently. Now, if you're just going to rip and read, which is kind of an old phrase because we don't really rip anymore, but back in the days of the teletype, we'd rip the forecast off there and read it. If you're going to just copy the Weather Service, then of course you're going to have the same exact forecast as the Weather Service. And if someone else in your market, normally there's 3 or 4 stations that do news in a given market. If someone else is in your market is doing the same thing, you guys are going to match up exactly. But most people are going to, what I call massage that forecast, change it up a little bit to go with their interpretation. So that's why you're going to see different numbers on the different shows. Now, as far as this perception that the forecast out 7 days is more accurate than the one out tomorrow is really not true. They have tracked this, the National Weather Service, over time, and has shown that basically the first 24 to 36 hours, so tomorrow through tomorrow night, is going to be about 80 to 90% accurate. Now, you're going to say, oh, well, last week it rained and they said it wasn't going to. There's going to be some misses. You got a 10 or 20% window there where you're going to be missing stuff. Now, as you go out farther in time, that accuracy does drop off. By the time you're on day 7, you're only at about 65%. And the explanation for that is very simple. A storm that is in Alaska today won't be here tomorrow, but it might be here in 5 days. So that storm can change course just a little bit and be way off over in Kansas instead of in Houston or whatever. Whereas a storm that's only 100 miles from you or 500 miles from you is probably not going to deviate as much. So you have a better chance of nailing that.
And for my listeners, I am here with Steve LaNore. You are a confirmed meteorologist with, 26 years experience? Am I close on that?
27. We'll haggle here. But sure, I've been in big markets and small markets and radio and TV, and I write on the Internet for weather. So, I'm not the best weatherman in the world. I'm not trying to come across that way, but I think I know what I'm talking about here. And so I would ask the folks to trust me a little bit on that, and you can Google me and see what I've been doing if you're more curious about my background.
Well, and they know that I wouldn't have you on if I at least didn't believe in your expertise. So at least you can have comfort in that. So when I watch the weather, especially here, I live here in Houston, but I also, wherever I go, I watch the weather and just to see how they present it. And I've noticed another trend that you've got people that they really can't be consistent as far as 10 days versus 1 day, but it seems like they always seem excited when bad things are happening. Because they kind of dwell on, like, everything is always going to be in the negative. If it's going to be beautiful for 8 days, they will concoct a heat index, which is we talked about this briefly when we first met, to make it sound even worse. So if it's going to be hot out tomorrow, say it's going to be 92 with a relative humidity of whatever, the heat index will be 101 because they really want to scare you with that 100 number. And the wind chill is the exact opposite. So the wind, if it's going to be 20 degrees and the wind's blowing at some odd number, it'll be -9. And they love these hundreds and minuses because it really grabs people's attention. Is that something that you see as more of, is it really just a gimmick, or do these numbers really apply to something?
Craig, we get a lot of that in the media in general, whether it's news or whether not so much in sports. The sports is going to be what it is. But, yeah, we get this pressure, I think, to make things a little worse than they are. Now, I've got to say at my television station, that's not so much. But a lot of places I've worked, I've even been told by promotion people, can you make that look worse? Zoom in on that storm and things like that. And to me, it's just appalling. The weather is the weather. If it's bad, you don't need anybody to exaggerate it. And if it's not bad, people already know that. So, yeah, we get these heat index reports where, it's a 100-degree heat index. Heck, that's a typical day in Houston or Dallas or Atlanta. That's NBD. That's no big deal. But they'll make it sound like everybody's dropping dead because it's hot. I hate that. It just does a disservice to our industry. So then people over time become numb to when something really is happening because they hear it all the time. I mean, every day in the summer is an emergency of heat. Every day you're supposed to give fans to people and check on your neighbors next door. And so when something really bad does happen, then no one really does anything more because they're already hearing it so much. It just becomes noise. They don't really pay attention to it. Same thing with the wind chill in the wintertime. It's rare in the southern states to really have a wind chill that's going to be all that bad. I mean, yeah, put on a thick coat, put on some gloves, you're good. But they make it sound like if you're out 30 seconds between your car and the store, your flesh is going to freeze. And that's just absurd. I'll give you an example. When I worked in Austin, Texas for 6 years, it would get down to 31 degrees, the first freeze of the season, usually around December 1st. All the stations would trot out their reporters and say, wrap your pipes, wrap your pipes.
Oh, bring in your pets. Don't forget that one. That's my favorite, is bring in your plants and your pets.
Yeah, well, and, there's probably a little more validity to that. Don't forget about your dog. Like, if you have a dog, you're going to forget about it, It's back there barking, and you just totally oblivious that it's cold. But on this pipe issue, if it's going to be below freezing for 2 or 3 hours, your pipes are not going to freeze unless you have a house with absolutely no insulation, like a 100-year-old home, and then hey, I've got to wrap my pipes. But most homes built in the last 50 years, the pipes are not going to freeze when it's 31 degrees. You have to get really cold for a whole day to freeze those kinds of pipes. But they run out, and they tell you to buy the electric tape and wrap your pipes with all this stuff every time it gets down to 30. It's just silly. This is an example of how the media doing this kind of thing in an attempt to make a story where there's really not one makes everybody in the weather and news industry look kind of stupid.
Well, now that I've vented about the heat index and wind chill, I wanted to get more in the nuts and bolts of forecasting, because I don't think a lot of people understand how it works. I think a lot of people think it's just the rip and read. What do you find to be one of the more difficult things to predict, or not necessarily predict, but forecast? Because I think a lot of people think you are just predicting the things, you're just kind of guessing, but there's a science to it. So what are some of the difficult things that you have to keep in mind when you're trying to tell people about rain and about possible tornadoes?
Well, one of the most difficult things I find in a given year, as you go through the seasonal cycles, a cold front can really be a huge change across that front. The front's just a boundary, so it could be 40 degrees in Oklahoma City and 90 in Dallas. That's a typical type of front that may come through in October, November, or let's say not quite that extreme, 40 on the north side and 70 on the south. So where is that front going to go? If it stalls 50 miles north of Dallas, then I'm 70 in Dallas. If it goes 50 miles south of Dallas, I'm 40. That's a huge difference, but we're only talking 100 miles of movement on a front that might be 5,000 miles long. It's very hard to pin down that place where it might stop, and that can be a huge bust. We call a bust a miss in the forecast world. So I think pinning down where fronts are going is one of the hardest things. Now, talking about severe weather, we can have a system coming in. They'll put out a moderate risk of severe storms, and the Storm Prediction Center does that in Norman, Oklahoma. They'll identify areas on the map where there might be severe weather, and they circle them. And if you go on the website, you can see where they'll have moderate or slight or even high risk. Those areas will change, though, day to day. And I don't think people understand that 3 days out, they say, okay, Austin, Texas has a moderate risk of severe weather. Well, now the next day, the system that was going to bring that severe weather is 200 miles farther north. So then the severe weather threat shifts north. And people are like, I don't know what you're talking about. But it's the same concept that the farther out you are from the day of your forecast, the more error you're going to have in that. So pinpointing severe weather out more than 1 day is very difficult. Every now and then we'll get a famous outbreak like last year in 2011. You might recall Alabama, Mississippi, they had a huge outbreak of tornadoes on April 27th, 2011. 3 days out, we knew there was going to be some bad things happening there. All the ingredients were coming together. They were all moving very consistently. But that's rare to be able to do that 3 days out on tornadoes. So most of the time a tornado forecast is going to be the day before, if that. You might hear about it that afternoon when they put out a tornado watch, and then 3 hours later, here it comes. So very tough to forecast severe weather very far out, and figuring out where these fronts are going can make a huge bust in a forecast. So just remember that when it's 40 instead of 70, it might only be 50 miles or 100 miles that we're off on a huge system that's moving through. And
usually that drop is where, in between the 40 and 70 is where all the bad weather actually is, because of the abrupt changes. We were talking about ingredients. To when you start seeing the ingredients for a bad day coming up, one or two, what are the things that if we're just looking at the map that we can say, oh, wait a second, this looks like if these two things come together, there's going to be problems in a day or two that we can identify. We don't have to actually, no offense, listen to the forecast. We can kind of look at the map and say, oh, these two things are going to cause a big problem. So what are we looking for?
Basically, yeah, that's a good question. You can do a quick and dirty analysis of your own by identifying two things on a weather map. Where's the moisture? And, of course, where's that moisture going? And where's your source of lifting? You got to have moisture, of course, to get any rain. They can get wind without moisture. So we're not talking about a windstorm, just talking about thunderstorms, snow, things like that. So look for the moisture and look for what may lift that moisture. Lift the moisture with the sun. Daytime heating, that's why clouds form in the daytime more than at night. A front will lift the atmosphere, so a front coming in will generate rain or snow a lot of times. We talk about these upper-level lows. They sound so mysterious. So basically, that's just an area of cold air moving above an area of warm air, and that will promote clouds to form because it causes the air to rise. If wind's blowing over a mountain, which if you're listening from Texas doesn't really apply in most of the state, that can be an issue. Like in Colorado, they get a lot of what they call front range thunderstorms from the Rockies, places like that. So lots of different ways to get the air to rise. Now, along the Texas and Gulf Coast, the sea breeze front can come in the summertime, and that can generate thunderstorms along the coastline every afternoon if you have the right pattern. So we watch for moisture and what kind of lifting sources we have to give us precip and storms.
Well, while we're on precip, one of the things that I've never been able to figure out, and now that I have someone who actually knows, the difference between sleet and freezing rain, because in my mind it's the same thing.
That's a really good one, Craig. Now I want you to imagine for me a big door stop. You got this wedge up under your door to keep it open. And the wedge gets thicker as you go away from the door, and of course it's thinnest where you jam it on the door with your foot. Well, the very thin part of that wedge would be your cold air very shallow near the ground. And then as you go away from the door and the wedge gets thicker, that's your cold air getting deeper. Now think about, say deeper, you start at the ground and go up. So let's say right along the front where it goes through, wind gets gusty, the temperature drops. The cold air right there is only a few hundred feet deep from you up. If you were to climb a ladder, let's say 500 feet up, from that point, the air would be a lot warmer because you're still in the warm air above that cold, dense air at the ground. As you get farther north behind the front, the cold air gets deeper. Now you have to climb a ladder 1,000 feet when you're 100 miles north of the front. And maybe if you're 200 miles north of the front, now your ladder's 2,000 feet high. Man, you're getting tired. Okay, it's getting higher and higher up there. So to get freezing rain, you have rain falling out of a cloud above the cold air in the warm air where it's above freezing, and the rain falls all the way down through the air above freezing, right at the ground level where that very shallow layer of cold air is. It freezes on contact with a car, a mailbox, a power line, and so forth, even the road. That can be what you get your major ice storms. Now, a little farther back in the cold air, it rains through the warm air, and now the drops fall into the cold air where it's a little deeper, so the drops freeze before they hit the ground, and we call that ice pellets or sleet. So the difference between freezing rain and sleet, the rain is liquid all the way to the ground with freezing rain, freezing on contact. With sleet, it becomes a frozen raindrop before it hits the ground. Now, to get snow, the cloud itself must be below freezing. Ice crystals have to form in the cloud, so that's why your cold air has to be deepest. And if you're listening from Houston or anywhere in the southern U.S., that's why you don't often get snow. The cold air is not deep enough. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I got that. That's good. That makes sense now. It's more like it's the difference between a meteor and a meteorite. A meteor isn't a meteorite until it hits the ground.
Exactly. Think about three-dimensionally in weather. You know, we look at a two-dimensional map on TV, and we tend to think two-dimensionally, but there's height there too, folks. It's not just length and width. So if you think about stuff three-dimensionally, it might help you realize these kinds of things.
And then I noticed that when it comes to hail, we've got massive hail in the middle of the country, and then you'll get golf ball size hail, which where I'm from, I'm originally from the Northeast, we didn't get that much hail at all. If it did, it was little tiny ice pellets. Why are they growing so? Is it just because it's Texas, so they just grow them big in Texas?
Well, you know, you have to get some more moist air going and get a big thunderstorm to produce hail. People are confused. Sleet is not hail. So the same thing that will give you sleet, most all the time will not give you hail. I mean, there's always an exception. So in weather, I've learned to not say never or always. I mean, I'm not even going to tell you that it'll never snow in Texas in July. It could happen under the right conditions, just never seen it. Okay, so for hail, though, you really want to have a warm, moist environment to cause that strong lifting, create a big thunderstorm. Now, on a hot day, it might be 95 degrees, a typical place. But if you were to go up about 16,000 feet in an airplane, it's freezing. As you go higher, it gets even colder. So up on the top part of the cloud, ice crystals begin to develop. As this warm, moist air rises, it condenses into droplets and then into ice. And that ice can grow and grow and grow. And the neat thing about hail is the bigger the hailstone, that kind of gives you a visual clue as to how strong this rising current of air we call the updraft is. So a baseball hailstone is coming out of a storm with a much stronger updraft than a marble-sized hailstone. And the updraft strength is directly related to the overall severe potential of that storm. Most tornado producers, Craig, make a hail of golf ball hail larger because the tornado is the updraft. So there's a direct relationship there. But the reason you don't get many in the Northeast and other places, you just don't get the type of air mass with the hot, humid energy that we need to get big hailstorms. Now, there are exceptions. We get a few. They make the news every now and then going through New York or Connecticut, someplace like that. But the middle of the country, which we call Tornado Alley, on down to Texas, tends to be I'll tell you, Colorado's the number one hail state because of the mountains help produce storms there. So anywhere along the Rockies and east into the, say, middle of the country is where you're going to get the big hailstones. And in fact, world's record hailstone fell last year in South Dakota. It was 8 inches across.
Man, that is...
Time to put it in the paper.
Was that a hailstone, or was that just toilet water from an airplane?
Oh, man.
Those
have been an alien life form, coming to Earth, and we'll hear more about that later.
Yeah, because every once in a while you'll hear about the toilet water will freeze and it'll fall out of a plane and hit someone's house, and it'll be a nice little blue brick. But the real reason we have you on is that you've got a book out. It's called Weather Wits and Science Snickers, Corny Jokes and Cool Facts. It's for kids, and it's really a nice, cool, fun way for kids to learn about science. And I've noticed that in America especially, science has not become the forefront anymore. And so you wrote this book, I'm assuming, to get kids more interested in science and more specifically in weather. So tell me a little bit about the book and where you came up with the idea.
Okay, Craig. Well, I've been a meteorologist 27 years, and it's typical in every place I've lived. People will call up the schools and ask you to come out and talk to the kids. I love doing that because I'm a science nerd. I mean, I'm just going to come out of the closet. I'm a science nerd, and I've always loved science. So I think science is cool because it's just, if you watch the Discovery Channel or Mythbusters, those are all shows about science. And science is just like, hey, I'm curious about this or that. How does it work? So like you said, I think we have a real deficit in our nation of good and interesting science at the school level. And over the years, I've seen how that is an issue in the classroom, and I've always been kind of a joke meister. So as I go out and I tell my jokes, I see how the kids warm up to the facts. I mean, I do give them good science, but I want to kind of get them going, kind of warm the audience up with a few jokes and, make it kind of fun, just less threatening that way to a kid. So I thought, why not take all these corny jokes that have made my family roll their eyes for years and do something educational with it. So about 3-4 years ago, I came up with the idea. Now, I can't draw anything except for on a weather map where we have software to help me. So I hired an artist to do the illustrations that go with the joke. So what we do is we have a joke, we have a full-color illustration showing the joke principle in a fun way, and then I explain the science that goes into the joke. After that, we put some links on an ebook. You have links. You can click on them. It takes you right to that website, and we have some real-world pictures of different things. For instance, I have a joke about the planet Jupiter, and then we show a drawing, and then we show the planet Jupiter and talk about what's going on there in a few paragraphs. So the response I've gotten has been universally good. That is not to brag. It is just what people tell me. The kids like it. They're laughing. Got a couple reviews from adults that said they liked it or they'd liked it for their kids. So I'm pretty excited about it with Christmas coming up, that it might be a pretty good gift. I do want to mention that the ebook right now is online on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, but I'm coming out with a printed version. I've had a lot of requests for that, and I think that might actually be better for kids. I mean, not everybody has a Kindle or a Nook, and a lot of kids like to have the book. They can sit there and read it while they're going to bed and that kind of thing. So I'll be rolling that out probably by the end of October on Amazon as well.
So where did your love for science and weather come in? Because, there's a lot of people who love science. And then there's even a smaller section of that like weather. And then there's even a smaller section of that who actually pursue it as a career. So, what was the thing that really made you go, this is something I want to do?
Well, there's a couple answers to that. I'll kind of put them together into one answer. The first thing I remember was when I was 3 years old. We had a thunderstorm. Physically running outside and jumping up and down, and I was just so excited because something cool was going on, something fantastic and bigger than life, and I wanted to know why. Of course, my mom's screaming at the porch, "Get back in here, you struck by lightning." And of course, I ran back in the house. But I've always had that fascination from the earliest memory. The second thing, and I've got to say this to encourage folks, I had a high school counselor. I was floundering a bit in high school like kids do. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I knew I liked science, but didn't really have the confidence to hack the math. And so I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And this counselor kind of walked me through over several weeks the idea that if you've got a passion and it's somewhat practical, to make a living at, you should go for it. If your passion is collecting sand, it's going to be hard to make a living at that. But I had a passion for science, and so he helped me become convinced I should become a meteorologist. And I got to tell you, I never thought I'd be on television. I'm not a camera hog. That's really not who I am. I just kind of wound up on TV by accident. And, it was interesting and kind of fun, so I stuck with it. But my original intention was to just be a meteorologist for the National Weather Service because I love weather. But it was almost by accident that I got on television.
Yeah, well, I think it's cool that someone actually was there to help you. My guidance counselor, I had 3 of them in 3 years, so I didn't have a guidance counselor because I had introduction meetings. So that's how comedians are born. that's how actors get theirs. Like, people leave them alone. But one of the things I know that you've got a project that you're thinking of doing it, but since we're running out of time, I want to cover some of the myths that really drive you crazy, that people always confront you about, that they think is the truth but is not.
Okay, we'll run through a couple of these real quick. Number 1 on my list, and I may even name my second book after it, which I'm coming out with, is this idea that if the sky is green, a tornado is coming. This type of an idea is typical with what I call partial truths. Something may work once in a while, that doesn't make it reliable. So if the sky is green, that may indeed mean a tornado is coming, or it may not. I've got 9 photos a friend of mine took of a huge tornado last year in Oklahoma, and in none of those was the sky green. It was black and gray. I chased the tornado myself this year, and you can go on my website and watch that later if you want, and I'll give you the address for that. There's not any green sky with that one either. So if you're waiting for a green sky as a reliable tornado warning, you're going to be whistling. Better off to flip on the TV and see what the Doppler radar shows, okay? Another one like that, oh, by the way, the green sky is probably being caused by hail more than not.
Now, before you move forward, I hear about these tornado chasers. Now, as someone who is educated about the dangers of tornadoes, because I think a lot of these tornado chasers aren't educated. They just think they're cool and fun. Why are you getting in a car and chasing them?
That is frustrating because when I was on my chase this last spring, we had over 100 people. There was a town of about 100 people, and the population doubled in 30 minutes as they chased this wall cloud. And you're right, there are 2 kinds of chasers. Those who know what the heck they're doing, have the proper communication equipment. You got to have an onboard GPS so you can have mapping function and know where you are. And they respect law enforcement and those kinds of things. Then you have the guys out there that watched a couple episodes of that Reed Timmer show, I think it was called Storm Chaser, and then they run out there and think, oh, we can do this. And those are the people that get people hurt. Those are the people you hear about that get their car beat to heck by hail, although a real chaser can get trapped in a hailstorm too. Yeah, they are a mark on the face of all storm chasers. Most storm chasers are performing a valuable service. They're identifying the tornado on the ground. They're getting information which helps researchers. And, of course, they're getting their jollies, too. They're having fun with it. And some of those guys sell their video or make really great documentaries out of them. But you do have that handful, probably 20%, I would say, that get out there, like in the movie Twister, and just make a mess for everybody. And they are becoming more and more policed. So the cops are starting to crack down on these guys a little more because they do create problems. Yeah,
well, the sad part is they're endangering the cops because the cops have to be out there chasing down these idiots for being in an area where they could get hurt. I saw a guy with his 9-year-old kid on the last chase. What is wrong with this picture? Yeah. It's just the concept that anything that can lift up a house or a cow, I don't want to be involved in. It's just me. I'm a wimp, but that's just me.
No, I say you're probably on the right track, Craig.
Well, one more myth, and then we'll plug the book one last time.
That was wonderful. Okay, another myth would be tornado warning does not mean a tornado's on the ground. Now, I hate this because this is a little confession about our industry. We don't always know 100% what's happening. I mean, it's science. Science is not perfect. So there are 2 types of tornado warnings. There's the type where someone sees it on the ground. That's, of course, the best type. It's what we call a confirmed tornado. Hopefully this person has some training. So when we get reports of tornadoes on the ground, we have to screen them. Sometimes people have been drinking a little too much and you don't know what they're talking about or whatever. So if it's law enforcement or a trained spotter, then we have confidence. Okay, there's a tornado on the ground, and by the way, radar shows something bad there, so we're going to go with that. Then you have the second type of warning, which is based on Doppler radar. Now, if you listen to National Weather Service, weather radio, or read those reports that are coming across the screen on the Weather Channel, it'll tell you Doppler radar indicates a tornado. If it says that, and it doesn't say it's on the ground, that means it's not been confirmed by an eyewitness, and it may not be on the ground. You may get a false alarm, and you'd be like, I hid for 20 minutes and missed my show. Well, count yourself lucky because next time it might be real. So we're going to have some false alarms on these radar-based warnings. Now you say, well, why do they issue a radar-based warning? The Doppler radar sees the air motion in there, and when the spin gets to a certain speed, they issue a warning based on experience over the years that, okay, you get it to spin at 60 miles an hour, let's say it might produce a tornado. The odds are 50-50 or better. So going to have those false warnings, but a tornado warning does not mean a tornado's on the ground. So just know there's going to be some false alarms, and go ahead and hide in your Frady hole until it's over anyway.
Well, I will certainly give the tornado and any meteorologist who's in an area with tornadoes the benefit of the doubt that there's going to be mistakes made because of the rapid the way they form. They can be nice and quiet, and then 10-15 minutes later you got that tornado. What about these modeling of hurricanes, which is a little different? And as far as I'm concerned, I live in Houston, so I don't really get that many tornadoes. But if a pygmy burps up the coast of Africa, I'm watching clouds on my television in the weather report for like 2 weeks as they talk about every little pocket of, because they're hoping it's the next Katrina. How can they figure out? How can they be so off? Because when you look at the models, there's always they usually, like you said, the closer they get, the tighter the models get, the little lines get. But there's always that one that no matter what, if it's going to go to Florida or up the East Coast, they show that one line that's going to hit Brownsville, Texas, or Mexico. Is there a reason why the models can vary so much?
Well, yes, it's each model looks at the physics of the atmosphere a bit differently. Now, I can take a baseball, if I know the weight of the baseball and how fast I'm throwing it and the air friction, and calculate very precisely where it's going to land. But that's a equation. It's a very simple equation that Newton came up with for that. As you get more complicated equations that handle moisture and spinning and lifting and falling and expanding and contracting of the air, there's different ways. Think of it like 10 different video games. They all have tanks and troops, and they're all going to go and attack the enemy, and you're going to play Call of Duty or whatever. But each of the video games does it in a different way. That's what's happening with these different models. All a model is a weather software program that's been written to forecast the weather. So within that software, the designers of it put in certain equations and ways to handle the atmosphere. The next model down the road tries to do the same thing, but it does it with a different technique. So each one's going to vary a little bit based on how it looks at that. Also, there's a thing called resolution. Think about a screen on your house. The screen elements, the little wires, are very far apart on one and very close together on the other. Which one's going to keep the house flies out? Well, the second one. It's got the denser screen, and we call this resolution on a model. If your model has very low resolution, kind of like a cheap cell phone camera, the picture's not as good as one of those nice high-res iPhones, okay? So it's the same concept that the higher the res is on the model, the more stuff you're going to pick up, the more disturbances, the more of those puffs of pygmy air, like you said. The lower resolution models are just not going to see that stuff, and so more errors start to show up in there. Right off the bat, you're doomed because your accuracy is less from the get-go.
Well, Steve, I really appreciate you taking time out. The book, again, is Weather Wits and Science Snickers. You can get it on Kindle. But I also know that you blog, you're on television. Where can people find you if they want to contact you?
Well, I have a Facebook page, and there are 2 Steve LaNores in the country. So I'm Steve LaNore 3, I think. I don't know why that is. There's only 2 of us. Anyway, I've got a page for the book. It's called Facebook.com WeatherWits. Okay, that's my book page, and then I've got a SteveLaNore.com website, Steve, LANORE, altogether.com, and I've got the book on there, links to Amazon and Barnes & Noble to get it. I've got some pretty cool little weather lessons on there, too, that are free. You can go in and read about things from volcanoes to the Dallas-Fort Worth tornadoes of April 3rd this year to the tri-state tornado, and there's some pretty cool videos that go with that. So my mission is not just to push a book, although I'm hoping you'll buy it. I really love science. I want to encourage people to understand that science is not magic, but it's not perfect. So if you understand that we're getting better all the time with weather and science, but that we're going to miss some, and understand why we miss them, then hopefully when you see me on the street, you won't say, how come it didn't rain yesterday? That's part of my mission.
Well, that's one of the great things about being a meteorologist is that you will get the blame if things go badly, but even if it's a beautiful day out, you still get the credit, and you didn't really do anything besides report it. So that's awesome. Yeah,
I guess if you look at it that way, I'm going to get about 85% credit because there's only a small number of them we miss because people are the way they are. They tend to remember those and forget all the good ones.
Yeah, they always focus on the negative. I understand that. But, Steve, I really appreciate you taking time out, and, good weather for you.
You have a wonderful day, and keep an eye on the sky.
That's our show for this week. I want to thank Steve for joining me. Remember, if you like the Reality Check Facebook page, you can listen to the podcast every Tuesday, 7 a.m. Central Time, directly from your timeline. Also, we are Reality Check Pod on Twitter. Follow our guest list, and you can get all our past guest tweets as well. See you next week.